So for those of you at home, my name is David Wachsman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Wachsman, as it says here on the screen. And I founded Wachsman in 2015. And I'm going to give you my origin story in a little bit. But first, on the topic itself. So I want to talk a little bit about media's responsibility and role in the blockchain space. I'm qualified to talk on the topic because I have about 4 times the largest PR agency in the world focusing on the industry, and I've been working in this space for 5 years now, which is a very, very long time in blockchain. But media has evolved in a different way and at a different pace than the actual industry itself. So let's go with a short history. In 2013, which is as far back as I can personally vouch for, Bitcoin Magazine had already been founded by Vitalik. CoinDesk already existed, and this is before Digital Currency Group had invested in it. Cointelegraph existed as well, although they went through several management changes since then. And there were some trade publications that were focusing on the industry. And those trade publications were full of real enthusiasts. So these are people who just wanted it to succeed. They were willing it to succeed, and the role of media at the time were primarily only these trade publications who were essentially trying to promote a technology. And this is primarily Bitcoin. There were very few other altcoins that existed, and none of those had any real popularity. There were mainstream reporters covering the space, which was interesting. The fact that the New York Times would assign someone like Nathaniel Popper to cover the space, or the Wall Street Journal would have 2 of its top reporters, Paul Vigna and Michael Casey, covering it, was kind of fascinating, because these people very early on understood there was a revolutionary technology. And what's remarkable is that those same reporters, some of whom had career changes, have been some of the best people at covering the evolution of the industry, in part because they've been along for the whole ride. So that's 2013. In 2013, the beginning of the year, for those of you who remember, Bitcoin was $7. At the end of the year, it was $1,200. Everyone on Earth had heard of Bitcoin, and they heard of it because Mt. Gox, a Japanese exchange, supposedly Japanese, crumbled out of absolute mismanagement and potentially some criminality. Another reason that Bitcoin was in the news was Bitcoin was being used as the transfer of value and the payment of services for something called the Silk Road, which was an illicit marketplace for illicit services and products. And people went to jail for that. So Bitcoin, at the end of 2013, is known as the coin that people lost money on, this electronic digital currency, a way to pay for drugs and even hitmen. And this is the world that I personally entered when I started working in the Bitcoin space. I had met the CEO of a Bitcoin exchange at a bar in New York, and he was trying to help his cryptocurrency exchange called CoinSetter stand out from the crowd. What might be interesting to some of you who work in the exchange space is that in the same way today, exchanges are trying to find a unique selling point. That same thing was true back in 2014. But back then, absolutely nobody had any trading volume. The market leaders were tiny little exchanges. Nobody had raised any real money anyway. Series A was about as big as anyone, including Coinbase, had gotten. And Coinbase didn't even have an order book exchange at the time. So what you had was these very amateur-run exchanges that were trying to do something that is today much more heavily regulated, trying to comply with laws that didn't exist yet for an asset class that was completely unclassified. And the media landscape was, as I said earlier, a few beat reporters to top publications and these trade publications that were just trying to promote the space. Absolute amateurs. Almost nobody at a trade publication had ever gone to journalism school, had ever worked at a real newspaper or magazine, and consequently the quality of work wasn't that good, with very few exceptions. Now what we've seen in the overall ecosystem is that there are some what I'll call Bitcoin OGs who have evolved and become market leaders today. And they're some of the most preeminent talents and icons in the industry. Those are the people who were able to evolve at the pace of Bitcoin and crypto. Media is much the same, and some of those leaders have turned into CoinDesk. And Pete Rizzo, for instance, who's the editor-in-chief there, was one of the first people to fully understand that you needed to actually do traditional type journalism even in an exotic space. And so 2014, what we saw was a 2-year bear market, something that which we may experience yet again right now. And in 2014, we only had VC money in the space, and that money started to drip out. By 2015, when I actually decided to found Wachsman, and I was just going on my own, Bitcoin looked dead. I showed up at the San Diego Bitcoin conference. It was called Inside Bitcoins. And they had an exhibit hall that was probably larger than the exhibit hall here. It was massive. It was like literally an airport hangar. And it had all these massive round tables with little chairs. And there was a heck of a speaker list. In fact, Patrick Byrne at that conference announced that they were going to be, with T0, able to trade shares, equity shares, on a blockchain. And they had gotten tacit permission from the SEC to do so. This was mind-blowing at the time. And at that conference, that landmark conference, there were only 3 exhibitors. And all you had to do was walk into there, if you were a reporter, with your camera phone, which did exist at the time in 2015, and you could have said, written an article and gotten tons of shares saying Bitcoin is dead and I've got the proof, because it looked dead. And then a very funny thing happened. In early 2016, Ethereum went from being an experiment, something that was hovering at about $7 per token, and started to trend up. Altcoins, like one called Dash I started working with mid-year, started actually becoming something that people cared about. There was enough interest, there had been enough time going by, and media was actually able to report on this trend. At the beginning of 2016, we saw ICOs, the first wave of what I call modern ICOs, with companies like Lisk and Digix. They were able to raise a few $1 million, primarily in Bitcoin, because Ethereum, again, wasn't all that valuable. Digix did raise in Ethereum. And they managed to essentially, kind of promote themselves through social media, which was a dominant form of communicating on channels like Bitcoin Talk. Again, you saw these trade publications. In fact, some of them actually died in 2015. And then you had these beat reporters. But the beat reporters started covering it more and more. And as crypto grew in price, and we saw in 2016, the market cap grew from about $6 billion to $17 billion by the end in total market cap. We started to see many more reporters covering the space. Bloomberg assigned reporters. Reuters had reporters who were covering it. And we saw that demonstrated at conferences like Consensus, which were getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. In 2017, of course, was a landmark moment for the whole industry, but specifically for the media space. So in 2017, we saw crypto starting at a $17.7 billion market cap. By the end of April, we were hovering at around $28 billion. And on what I call graduation day, on May 1, over that weekend, we saw crypto go from 28 million to 38, about a 30% increase in market cap. And then during the month of May, we experienced a growth from $30 billion to $90 billion in market cap. This is all when ICOs just started happening. Companies like Aragon raised $25 million in 2 minutes. But reporters didn't know how to cover that at the time. So a company that raised $25 million in 2 minutes, led by a 21-year-old CEO who Peter Thiel had essentially anointed as one of the leaders of the future, who had been invested in by Tim Draper and every possible award. This 21-year-old genius with a company raising $25 million in 2 minutes, TechCrunch wouldn't cover it. That's how unsophisticated reporters were at the time and how unprepared they were for the ICO revolution. And then in June, a company called Bancor raised $153 million, and suddenly, everyone on earth took notice. This was a really important moment. When Bancor happened, when we had one of the architects of the euro behind a cryptocurrency, when we had enormous real money, this was money that was more like Series D or Series E money covering the space, that's when reporters started taking notice. And it was then, which was in summer of 2017, that we finally started seeing mainstream interest. And my company, which had been around now for about 1.5 to 2 years, suddenly we went on overdrive. We couldn't pick up the phone without getting 5 calls. Last year in 2018, we turned down 1,000 clients because that's what we started seeing on the excitement level. But if I was seeing 1,000 companies coming to us that we had to turn down, imagine being a reporter. Now imagine being a beat reporter in a mainstream publication with all these new companies trying to go and get some of that Bancor money or something like it. It became completely impossible. And what we started to see is reporters who were just doing anything they could to find trusted resources and sources. And they were few and far between. Because every day, from every continent, there was some sort of new company promising a vision of the future solved with a brand new token. And so reporters went from being reporters to due diligence officers at hedge funds. They had to, because you see, they were massively influential. At that point in time, there was no tracking of even of the ICOs. In fact, there were these ICO listing sites which popped up, and they were very incomplete. But there was no information even in lists. There was no information on lists. There was only news sites. There was no professional anything covering the industry, with the exception of the trade publications, and some of those beat reporters who stuck around for a while. But now there was all this new money in the space, everyone figured, and by everyone I mean the media figured, let's start investing in this too. But as you've already heard, media is very, very slow. They get their information, and they should, if they're professionals, a little bit later. And then their job is to vet that information. And so many of them started making decisions, like some of the unfortunate hedge funds that popped up in January 2018 at the beginning of 2018. And so what we started to see is new news publications, primarily trade, appearing in 2018, many of which are already dead. We also saw during the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, some of those trade publications graduate themselves. Companies like CoinDesk started poaching top reporters from main top-tier publications around the world and moving to their New York office, setting up in London. What we saw in 2018 is an evolution of some of the trade publications like Crypto Briefing or The Block, which were able to get real money behind them because they were going to be doing a different type of professional reporting. In 2018, and again, it took a little bit of time, what we started to see is the news publications, including TV channels covering Bitcoin, covering crypto. You could not go out watch Bloomberg, Fox Business, or CNBC without seeing Cardano's price is up 20% today around the bottom. And people were talking about it. Commentators were going on TV talking about these tokens as if they were equities being with full discovery and transparency. There was none of that. It was completely crazy. But as the hype died down, and as we saw the markets crumble in 2018 and descend about 90%, we saw TV channels stop covering it almost entirely, unless it was a negative story. And what we started to see is the pendulum swung from crypto can solve everything to crypto can solve nothing. And that brings us to near today. Does anyone here subscribe to Bloomberg Magazine, the actual print, Bloomberg Business Week? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, that means you're probably in crypto. So in January of this year, Bloomberg published a cover story, and it said, "Rhymes with Bitcoin," and the cover was all brown. About the next week, Forbes, in print, wrote a hit piece about one of the most famous entrepreneurs in our industry that was, I thought, pretty unfair. And what we were seeing is a dejection of everything that the media had previously anointed as the future, had been hyping up. Because they couldn't make sense, they couldn't make heads or tails of what was actually happening. What we've seen since then actually is, I think, a good thing. There's been a bit of a pause, and with the reduction in the noise, we've seen a lot more signal. The reporters who have lasted throughout this cycle are now extremely mature. They know exactly what they're doing. They know what's hype, they know what's not. And what they've begun demanding of me, of my staff, and my colleagues in the industry is much more. The standards have raised. So for those of you who are entrepreneurs out there, please know, if you don't have something, a real product that's really useful, no one will care. The fact that you've raised some money is no longer newsworthy. Companies have raised billions and billions of dollars in this industry. That's not news enough. If you brought on an advisor, no one cares. Unless it's Barack Obama, that might be newsworthy. But with the exception of that, no one's going to care. You have to have a real product. It needs to actually have real market penetration. And if it has those things, I believe reporters will care and they'll write about it. We've seen some more evolution in the PR space too. What we've seen is a lot of investigative journalism popping up. This is a very good thing. You see, I told you at the very beginning of this talk that in 2013, 2014, with the exception of some of the beat reporters at the top publications, they were essentially promoters of the technology. And I believe that there is a real place for that, especially with something as complex and sophisticated and tough to understand as blockchain and cryptocurrency. But it's very important that reporters maintain their station as the fourth estate to provide a check on the goings-on of an industry, especially one as borderless. And although the technology itself may allow for trustlessness, what you need is some sort of trusted source telling you what is and isn't. And the investigative journalism now happening, I think, is going to help clean up some of the messes that we've seen the past couple of years. Is going to get rid of some of the people who have been essentially making a challenge for those of us who are good actors in the space. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that because it's going to start being funded, because of this whole lag time that media tends to experience, by real media companies. And I would not be surprised if there's not a substantial amount of consolidation and M&A, not just in the Bitcoin space, but in the coverage of the Bitcoin space too. A couple more interesting things before I let you all go. The conference scene has been essentially a shadow following along with the evolution of the Bitcoin industry. And what we're here today at Token 2049, the premier event in Asia. And this type of high caliber event that can draw in the world's best speakers from everywhere continues to be very well attended and hyper successful. Last year, my events team, which I cobbled together from professional event organizers from Google and the biggest banks, they went and vetted 800 crypto events worldwide. 800. Nobody has time for that, which is why I had to assemble a team of near 15 people to do that full time. Many of those conferences, or those which thought they were going to be making money until the end of time, are now dead. And what we're left with is simply the super high caliber events. And those high caliber events, I believe, are going to continue to be draws even during this bear market. So on the event side, you're seeing a flight to quality. On the news side, I believe you're seeing a flight to quality too. But there's some nuances. So one thing that's also popped up in the last couple of years is podcasts went from being pretty amateur to much more sophisticated. What we're also starting to see is, and funded through several different mechanisms, high quality video production that looks more like something you'd see on television and less like an amateur podcast being done from someone's basement. That's another very, very good sign for the industry. And we're seeing some preeminent people doing some of these podcasts who have really something to say and much more than simply shilling some new token. Again, another very good sign for the industry. I think what's next is going to be actually TV channels devoted and focused on this industry through of course, the web at first. And I wouldn't be surprised they get piped into people's homes via satellite cable. I think we're also going to see an increase as security tokens become much more the norm in people covering the space in different, let's call it, bifurcated ways. So you're going to start seeing reporters who focus on market structure, on token price, and these types of things. We're going to start seeing tech-heavy reporters who are going to be able to reviews of code, and these are going to be very popular people. There's going to be some reporters covering the code of some of these companies that are going to be essentially celebrities in and of themselves, because we've come that far, and there are enough different developers actually working on Solidity and going to B9 Labs to learn more about how to program in various blockchain languages that are going to be kind of reading this stuff, and they're going to, again, anoint them as celebrities too. And then what we're going to finally see is reporters covering the larger trends of blockchain. These stories of Bitcoin's price went up Y%, or Ether dropped 10% today, those stories are going to become increasingly less popular, and the stories about people in the industry are going to actually take shape. It's kind of amazing, and I'll leave you with this, that an industry that has as many unique personalities as the co-founders of Ethereum, a combative, brilliant bunch of people, that there's never been a really good story about that. There's never been a book or movie covering the people of blockchain in the same way that the social network came out in 2010. And there's been, if you think about it, far more years passed since the dawn of the Bitcoin revolution as the social network when it came out in 2010, talking about Facebook, which has only been around about 6 years before. So I expect to see movies beyond Netflix documentaries talking about our industry too. So as you can see here, we've had a grand evolution of the media space since I came on the scene at the end of beginning of 2014. I imagine it's going to become more and more sophisticated. As a reporter, it's going to be even harder to cover the industry, especially if you don't have subject matter expertise and you haven't been in it. But I think it's the job of everyone in this room and all the entrepreneurs out there to do your very best to educate reporters on what it is that you've actually done. Remove the adjectives, remove the adverbs, just tell them the facts and let them determine how best to tell the story. Thanks, everyone.